are doing 95% of the work the exact same way. They just need to agree upon the last 5%.
We're limited as humans, right? We only know what we've been taught and what we've experienced. So if you have a group of people who taught and experienced the same thing, it's going to be hard to break out of that.
These are true stories
of the shared pains
facing designers,
builders,
inspectors,
and operators
on our quest to
streamline collaboration
in the digital age. Find out what happens
when industry and technology
stop playing nice
and start getting real.
We
are the
Construction
Progress
Coalition.
And this is the Shared Pains Podcast. Welcome to the final episode of Season 1 here on the Construction Shared Pains Podcast. My name is Sasha Reed, and as your host, my role is to help all of us gain a new perspective on the systemic changes necessary for design and construction to thrive in the digital age. Today, we're going to take a step back from the specific CEX workflows discussed throughout most of the season to look at the common threads that are driving grassroots innovation and standards development around the world. To share his perspectives on CPC's year in review, let's bring in Thought Leadership Chair Dan Smolillo.
As a newcomer to the group, it's exciting to learn of all these other people trying to battle the industry issues that we face, whether it's technology, workflow improvement, production, or even diversity within construction as it stands today. Exciting to know that, we're not alone in this battle. The CPC has really provided me with a community of like-minded professionals, focused on a common goal of solving these shared pains. We're all facing the same thing, and it's nice to know that we're not in it alone.
The process is fairly simple. Digest, debate, decide, and deliver. First, we'll digest the common opportunities and challenges that we're all facing in order to debate how common data exchange would begin to solve them. Here to introduce our global perspectives on this episode is CPC's Executive Director and roving reporter, Nathan Wood.
Thanks, Sasha. As we wrap up a whirlwind 2018, we thought it fitting to take a step back and talk about our most basic shared pain of all, change management. As they say, old habits die hard, and construction is full of bad habits that are in need of changing. For AEC professionals to thrive in the digital age, we need the ability to keep up with today's pace, where change is the only constant. Before I introduce our first guest, Sasha, you're not going to believe this. So I'm watching Travis Voss presenting his support for CPC in front of thousands of attendees on the keynote stage at AU Connect and Construct. And I look to my left and see our friend from Sweden, Jimmy Forsberg.
Hi guys, my name is Jimmy. Been with Skanska for 8 years. Started as a CAD designer. I then went on to work with my boss today, Lotta, in a program within Skanska that was called Go Mobile. So it was a program spanning over 4 years, creating awareness within our projects of how it can be like working digital and the benefits of doing that, and also what sort of tools and stuff like that were available now, or then, I should say.
As I know you like to say, Sasha, we are cut from the same cloth. I wish you could have seen the excitement on my face as Jimmy was explaining the origin of their GC coalition in Sweden, and of course the similarities to how we got started up in 2013.
Our whole time at Skanska, working smart, working efficient, working digitally has been sort of something I aspire to do many times without even thinking about it, actually. I got approached by a colleague from another company, and we were talking about our usage of PDFs, our extensive usage of PDF, I should say. We then sort of teamed up and said, okay, can we do a standardized process for design review? And we sort of gathered the top 5 contractors in Sweden and said, okay, can we do this? We are doing 95% of the work the exact same way. So we actually just need to agree upon the last 5%. And we then had a meeting with Sasha Reed over at Bluebeam, and she gave us the insight to what you guys were doing in the CPC, and sort of thought, okay, why can't we try to do this? So that's what we did. It sounds easier than it is, of course.
Speaking of a group of GCs sharing best practices transparently, allow me to introduce another gentleman who coincidentally popped up at AU Connect and Construct.
Mark Decker, Jacobsen Construction out of Salt Lake City. And, came from Hunt Construction out of Phoenix before that.
Mark is part of a Skunkworks group along with the usual suspects, Chris Langiza, Alan Engel, DJ Phipps, and others that have evolved into what is now the BIM and BIR, B-I-R Slack group. First, I asked Mark about the history of this group.
We actually started something in 2010. It was National VDC Managers. Actually, it was BIM managers back in the day. And so we were having these great conversations at conferences, and we didn't want to stop there, so we put together a OneNote page and basically a phone call, a go-to meeting, and we did that once a month, and we've been doing it ever since.
Having joined the Slack group of myself a few years ago, I have to say the brutal honesty and transparency from some of the more active users it's part comical, it's part insightful, it's part frustrating, yet it's always a reassuring feeling that at least I'm not the only one. But knowing that there's a fine line between transparency and competitive advantage, I asked Mark about his thoughts on it.
So it started out being pretty clean on the lines of what we do and what we don't do, and we had it set up to where everybody was a viewpoint backend, everybody was using Bluebeam heavily, and so we were all talking the same talk. And we had a Google Doc or a Google survey that kind of explained what you were doing, what you were working on, what you had, what you didn't have. And because we were all geographically in different spots, there was no real problem. It's all changing now, right? Everybody's everywhere, and the group's gotten a lot bigger with Slack.
If you've never used one of these new public-private communication platforms like Slack, HipChat, or Microsoft Teams, the appeal of no more email or having all communication tracked in a central database can produce unintended consequences. As Mark explains, the group's transition to Slack has created their own change management shared pains.
Funny thing is it's not funny, it's kind of sad. It's the good and bad, right? So we actually have some people that just don't communicate as much anymore, and I think it's because of that. They are in the same location, and they do have some things that maybe they feel like they don't want to share. So it has some give and takes.
Mark hits on a common shared pain we've found throughout Season 1 around the incentive to share data transparently. One subset of the industry also looking to leverage the sharing of data to help their cause is the Women in Construction movement. Thanks to Chris Langiza, I was able to connect down at Procore Groundbreak with two evangelists in the Women in Construction movement. Please welcome
Danielle Edberg, Senior Manager of Industry Advancement at Procore. Recently, over the last year and a half, started a Women in Construction initiative within our company. And we actually kicked that off last year in March at this event at Groundbreak. I was attending this event really as part of like a regional marketing team for Procore. We were going to exhibit, do a bunch of demos, hang out behind a booth, kind of the standard trade show deal. And I went with one of my other colleagues.
Nancy Novak, and I am the Senior VP of Construction for Compass Data Centers. My portfolio covers pretty much anything you could think of building, like the Pentagon and launch pads and museums and hotels. And data centers are super exciting, so now I'm excited to be a part of this company.
In preparation for this interview, I did some research, and according to the National Association for Women in Construction, women make up less than 10% of the construction workforce. In fact, construction is lower than even the mining industry in female representation. Before we get into how accommodated exchange could, in some way, help to change the status quo of gender inequality in construction, Nancy first helps us understand the compounding challenges that women in our industry face today.
We have a double-edged sword here in the field because you've got the macho trade environment that's not very conducive to women. And then you also have, the science, technology, engineering, math. So systemically, we're not always brought up to do those things. And even in the office environment or the management environment or the supervisory environment, going into those is common. However, the going into the trades has actually improved quite a bit. The staying in the trades and the staying in the business is still pretty bad, especially when you get to management level or above. We have this cliff that everybody falls off of.
Rounding out our guest perspectives on the role of leadership and technology as drivers of change are two guys that I've known for many years through the conference circuit. From our most recent discussion at Procore Groundbreak, let's welcome
Dave Burns, Director of Innovation and Field Applications for McCarthy. Kind of have the dual role of our implementation team for all of our core applications that our operations teams leverage And then on the innovation R&D side, it's just standing up what hopefully is or becomes kind of a best-in-class program for driving innovative solutions, technology or non-technology related, for our company and for our industry.
Dave brings an interesting perspective because prior to his 11 years with McCarthy, Dave actually came from the software side of the business. So he's essentially bilingual in both technology and industry. And sitting to his left at Groundbreak was
Matt Daly, co-founder and CEO of StructionSite, studied mechanical engineering, quickly realized that I was never going to be the best engineer, and I got into sales, started working for a company called Vero, working with more aerospace and automotive manufacturers, helping them implement 3D imaging systems to lean out their processes and get rid of waste in the manufacturing process. The McCarthy Kaiser Oakland project was sort of the birthplace of a lot of what now has become StructionSite. I met Philip Lorenzo, my co-founder, where we spent years developing, mainly, I got to give Philip the credit here, developing some pretty amazing workflows for using 3D laser scan data on job sites.
As we begin to look for common strategies to address all of these non-technical barriers to industry transformation, I want to go back to the role of transparency as a catalyst for change. I asked Jimmy about any challenges early on with their Swedish GC coalition when it came to drawing new lines between what's industry standard versus what is a company's intellectual property.
Because everybody from the beginning had a standard for design review within each company, but it was for just that company. So when we sort of sat down together, we sort of had to expose ourselves and show, okay, what standards does we have, and the egos and stuff like that. I was like, okay, let's put that aside, show what you have, show your hand, sort of say.
I asked Mark where he draws the line when it comes to sharing internal best practices.
It's personal preference, so I'm pretty open, and I've dialed into some pretty intense workflows, and this is what we're doing, and someone could look at that and kind of just run with it and take ownership of that or use that for gains. But I think I don't know if you can really protect against it, but I think the one thing that is kind of good is if I'm talking about it on there, then I've probably, like me personally, I've probably already flushed it out.
But the real motivation for someone like Mark to stay involved is less about answering others' questions and more about what they get in return.
We all can grow, though, together, right? So it's really hard to be really good and really proficient, safe in Salt Lake, and try to keep up with guys in the Bay Area or guys on the East Coast. If you're not talking to them and you don't know what they're doing. And if we can all work together and kind of just cover the same problems and come up with similar solutions, or ask someone that can help you come up with a solution, that's what it's all about. So I think it's you share because you want to get information back, right, and help yourself.
For any change initiative to succeed, the value of increased transparency must be reciprocal. If the change creates a win-lose scenario, the loser almost always finds a way out of it. The best way to identify win-win solutions is by including impacted stakeholders in the conversation and listening to their needs. Danielle explains how this key ingredient of inclusion can often get overlooked when trying to address our shared pains with diversity in the workplace.
I mean, diversity and inclusion is like a really hot topic right now. Companies are starting to think about implementing programs, figuring out how to do this, and a lot of people lean on the side of diversity. Like if we can recruit this workforce, that's where we can focus. We can figure out how to change our job descriptions, which are all really great and important things. But what we've learned, at least through our own initiative internally and through talking to a lot of our clients, is that we need to focus on the inclusion piece. And that includes all the way through moving up the ranks, right? So because if we recruit all of this talent and they don't stay, then we've just kind of wasted our resources and we're not actually fixing the problem.
The combination of transparency and inclusion ultimately produces trust in the new system and allows it to flourish. When it comes to convincing the field to adopt new tech, Dave describes the benefits from a leadership perspective.
With that trust, then you actually start to see more lines of communication open to where they kind of see you as like a consultant, like, hey, I'm thinking about this. Have you seen it? What do you think? So that takes time, though, to get to that point.
So regardless of the change initiative, it seems our biggest challenge again comes back to people. Nancy's strategy?
You gotta mix it up. We're limited as humans, right? We only know what we've been taught and what we've experienced. So if you have a group of people who have kind of been taught and experienced the same thing, it's going to be hard to break out of that.
One way of mixing it up, also known as design thinking, is to focus on solving not just your own challenge, but also the challenge of a counterpart within the same effort. I learned from Jimmy about a simple but extremely beneficial example of this strategy that unfolded as the Swedish PDF standards were being developed.
We were the top 5. We share a lot of subcontractors and consultants and designers and whatever. And as I said before, 95% we did the exact same thing. So the only thing we needed to sort of agree upon was what statuses should we have, what should they mean, and then also then to create the sort of the visual effect.
Jimmy explains the dual benefit when GCs and trade contractors generate standards collaboratively.
If a subcontractor works with Skanska, on Monday, and then goes to our competitor on Tuesday, then green means what green means, and pink means what pink means. It's no difference between, and that is something that eliminates risks and confusion.
When I asked Mark his thoughts on opening up the Slack group to a larger audience, he reminded me of one side effect from increased transparency and inclusion.
That is, if we do open it, it's going to get really noisy really quick. And so the National VDC Managers actually has their own private channel on Slack, which we could still do. There's a good and bad, I guess.
As Mark subtly mentioned there, Slack does have the ability to filter the noise and control the chaos, but only when the appropriate communication protocols have been set up. Digital platforms give us the ability to filter down relative information while still capturing all of it in a central location. Whether the objective is to expose a wrongdoing or measure a tangible benefit, Nancy reminds us that
data is very powerful, so we're trying to figure out, why are the stats the way they are, and how can we improve it? And I'd like to be able to move the needle quicker. And I think what Procore has done is they've helped leverage a lot of the things that are happening with the exposure. So it's been great.
When industry leaders, technology solutions, and their governing organizations align themselves around shared values that promote transparency and inclusion, remarkable changes happen. I asked Jimmy what's next with their initiative in Sweden and how he's raising awareness.
I've been to Denmark, I've been to UK, now I'm in the US speaking about this. We have a committee now set in place. We have an initiative right now to create the same workflow for models. Just last week, we agreed to help, and because all the municipalities in Sweden have shown their support to this and would like to implement this everywhere.
Just as Swedish GCs took the original PDF guidelines and made it their own, CPC hopes to follow in their footsteps by partnering with our local governments to fund separate CDX initiatives where we would
help with the training, implementation, and also show up at events they have and stuff like that.
As CPC looks to scale industry change through common data exchange initiatives in 2019, knowledge-sharing platforms like Slack or IdeaScale will become a critical tool for collecting and communicating the next generation of collaboration standards. Because to Mark, the BIM and Beers group in Slack is more than just a place to troubleshoot technology issues.
Addressing problems that are specific to our career, right? A little bit deeper than we would be doing at a software level or an industry level or at a regional level. And I think that's the biggest thing. And to be honest, a lot of the conversation and questions are super random, right? And that having it be random actually gives us a chance to think about things differently.
This need for consistency while still allowing for randomness is a challenge that will only continue to get worse. Dave gives us his strategy for filtering the noise of new technology.
Management strategy. We have to have a scheduling strategy. We have to have a estimating strategy. So you have these platforms, hopefully, of technology, and then you kind of look around the outside of that. A number of these, more targeted solutions over here in this booth area kind of fit it into a category of like, hey, we have a reality capture category. StructionSite may be one. We might have kind of a computer vision category on top of our reality. So if you build that strategy out, then I think you can hopefully kind of catch things coming from a lot of different directions.
A CDX is worthless without a clear strategy to communicate what data matters, how it's captured, and where it's stored. A win-win CDX integration requires project stakeholders to align on certain requirements, but it doesn't mean they have to align on the benefits received by it.
Progress photos, milestone photos. If we can speed up the capture of those, we will celebrate that to the moon. But is that really like where things end? No.
Taking pictures of your job site, isn't it like a huge value add task? The data is very valuable, but so how fast can we make that? So like doing things like video walk and speeding that process up has been real helpful.
But the other thing about like readying ourselves for disruptive change, you look at like AI, right? Or even you were just saying, Matt, like, you know, we know the data is valuable, but if we can kind of, you know, solve this basic problem. So we're very cognizant of that.
Common data exchange produces benefits that are both short and long term. The first step in any CDX initiative begins by easing the exchange of data between project delivery stakeholders. But the real benefit is found when the streamlined data is also shared more transparently, leading to measurable benefits for all. Nancy brought up one interesting opportunity to increase female representation in construction by pairing it with another innovative trend.
Offsite manufacturing is a huge push right now in our business. That's going to help a lot.
What if we could measure across all construction projects to find correlations between the use of prefabricated assemblies and its impact on not only project cost and schedule, but also diversity?
Because a lot of women are still primary caregivers, and when you got to commute 2 hours back and forth to work and be in the environments, and then daycares don't open at 5:30 in the morning and so on and so forth, it makes it really super hard.
At the end of the day, most of us know what needs to change in construction. But as with everything else in life and business, what gets measured gets managed. Dave explains that to him, it's less about the short-term efficiency and more about
and how we schedule, establishing our cost code and budget structures, classifying our RFIs. BIM is obviously in that category too. We're taking a look at a lot of that stuff and saying, I know this isn't going to be the most sexy thing for us as an organization to go and chase in the near term, but we know that there's this like long tail on the industry. A guy on my team who just joined, he's like, you make these changes today, you're not going to realize kind of mass adoption or mass change for quite a lot of time. But if we can start doing these things now, we're positioning ourselves well for these integrated ecosystems.
While the benefit of a CDX to Dave might be in the longer term, the benefit to Matt and StructionSite is immediate.
But what CDX is really going to be doing for like from the vendor perspective is laying the groundwork for making sure that we don't have to be duplicative in our efforts later, right? So when there are standards and when we know how to build the software in a way that matches the standard, it reduces our load and allows us to go build other more awesome things and not think so much about how we integrate with Procore versus some other vendor and spend less time on things like that do take up engineering resources and time and make it so we can't build something that is more valuable for the end user because I'm busy working about figuring out how to integrate with some other platform that has some inefficient way of managing an RFI.
I think it's a balance, right? It's a balance between in order for interoperability truly to work, you have to have a common schema, right? Taxonomy, a common schema. But the beauty of machine learning and complex databases is that you create a relationship between them. So having a minimum required set of tags or naming ways of naming or zones or IDs, that then gives us as a technology industry, that gives us the bullseye. That then gives us what we can design against. And then we don't have to push and force the humans into a certain pathway. We can allow the complexities to be what they are and let the technology do more of that heavy lifting. So all the cognitive effort goes into solving the normal project challenges, not these.
A huge opportunity for this one really is infrastructure projects, because it's the more I dive down that rabbit hole, there's nothing. I mean, no one's having these conversations on infrastructure projects. It's, what's your location? Well, we have our stations. But the civil guideway, one of our projects, they're like, well, the civil guideway is this station number, but the civil for foundations and everything else is these station numbers. So coming up with that location awareness for infrastructure projects is huge, because there's no easy way to do it. How do you cover an 8-mile stretch, 20-mile stretch, or some of our projects are 30 miles? What is that common thread
And I think looking at 2019, infrastructure and transportation is going to be a low-hanging fruit for us to look at, because you look at those conditions of how much money goes into those projects and how easy it is to now capture, reality capture those changes in that progress when you're doing horizontal work like that. With this technology, I think those are slam dunk CDEX projects for next year that we really want to focus on.
And what we're seeing are, drones being flown over that 30-mile project, stitching together all of what they're capturing, pulling that into a map-based application that can then, give you heads-up display as to where your equipment is, what your issues are, et cetera, because it is a different way of visualizing that project.
But this gets back to the real question of what exactly do you want to do? And do you need a drone flight? Do you need a LiDAR scan? Do you need a laser scan? Do you need, there are all these different types of technologies that can solve different problems. And if you can't articulate either what risk you're worried about that you want to protect or what opportunity you want to capture, the technology is just the technology.
Yeah, I mean, even with current regulations, you can't do it with drones because you have to visually see your drone. So you have to actively be driving in a vehicle, get approval to fly your drone to map out that entire place. Well, when you're on an infrastructure project, you're building the bridges and the roadways, and you can't map out 30 miles because it's just not there yet. So it's how do you cover your full site? It's an interesting issue to have.
I always take this back to, it reminds me of what everyone's trying to do now with a digital twin. There's essentially your digital representation of what is going to be, and then there's the physical world where you're going to build it. And so in my mind, that they're kind of parallel thought ideas that are looking for the same solution.
I love that you said digital twin. I'm looking for the Gartner hype cycle, and have to give shout out to Amrita over at Jacobs. The term digital twin, because it is essentially the definition of BIM that we've had for 20 years, but it's this brand new term now of digital twin. And so all the OG BIM folks are kind of rolling their eyes of like, yeah, we've been there. Like, we're in the trough of disillusionment. Whereas if you look at the 2017 hype cycle, digital twin is right there, like that early emerging technology. Like, this stuff is very new, even in like the manufacturing space, yet we just kind of expect it to work in the construction space.
There's a lot of recycling that's going on.
Well, and we should, part of our role as this podcast is to bring in those outside, like, yes, manufacturing is different from construction, but that doesn't mean we can't learn something from them, right? Like, we don't have to hate on them just because they're different. They are different, but they're certainly doing certain things that in certain conditions we could replicate, but in other conditions we couldn't. And that's what makes a good builder, is knowing when you can and when you can't.
CPC wishes to thank all of our guests that have shared not only their pains, but also their process for overcoming them. With a look ahead to season 2 beginning in February, we'll dive into topics like diversity in the workplace, the role of thought leadership, and the hype around blockchain.
So, Sasha, before we head to season 2, you think we should probably do like a end of year, end of season plus Delta?
So lean of you, Nathan.
Of course, lean whisperer.
I actually do like plus deltas. All right, secretly. Okay. All right, I'll go first. By far, my plus this season was being able to moderate the webinar with Building UK between you, Nathan, and Jimmy from Skanska, introducing the UK audience to the work. Just having the work that the CPC's done here in the US inspire and guide some of the work that our peers over in Sweden are doing. That was just a full circle moment, kind of like, wow, this is really working. We're really bringing overlapping efforts together. The
intelligence of their questions was amazing.
Yeah.
They were spot on.
It's why shared pains is so relevant, because it really doesn't matter to the size, the geography of where you're working. A lot of these pains are the same. Okay, Delta, hands down, is the fact that I kept mispronouncing Dan's name.
Malillo.
Like armadillo.
I don't know how many times you said that. I will practice before we record the podcast.
Don't look at it. Just don't look at it.
Today was the first day I said Smilillo.
Got it.
See?
That's beautiful.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's unedited. That's spot on right there.
You heard it here.
You are a good sport, Dan. All right, Nathan.
Okay, I'll go next. So plus, I still to this day keep coming back to the conversations overhearing at the CDX challenges in Anaheim at AEC Next, and just this general understanding of until we can communicate the solutions to these problems, the technology won't solve the problem. So just very refreshing to kind of hear that resounding call from the industry that this is at the intersection of people, process, and technology, not one of the three. And then as far as the Delta, I think depending on who you are, where you are, I may have promised that the report out, the formal CDX report that we do every year would be coming out recently after the AEC Next. And to this day, it will be out soon, before the end of 2019 or before 2018, because it has to be a 2018 report.
So head to constructionprogress.org/CDX and you should be able to download it now. Okay, take it away, Dan.
I would say my plus for this year is probably just in an industry where we don't often share and don't want to exchange data and insights and things like that, the general openness that people shared with interviews and just networking at events, talking about this common data exchange, talking about their shared pains on the podcast. It was great to see that everyone is open to making a change, and it makes you excited for what's to come in the industry and how we can together solve these problems. I'd say one of my deltas was the ever-evolving life cycle of producing a podcast. I think before we even finalized what the podcast was going to be, we were on like the 8th or 9th iteration of what it might be. So that was something that was probably the delta, but you know what?
We had a name though. We always had the name.
We had the name. The name was there.
Everything else evolved, but we had the name.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I think season 1 was great, and it's exciting to see what's going to come next. And hearing the Smamillo name, it gets confusing sometimes. If you look at it and try and read it, that's when you're going to screw up. It's a tough one.
The Eastern European thing.
It's not, I swear, it's not Smamillo.
Got it
locked in.
You're 3 for 3 today. It's exciting.
We're going to keep scoring next season.
Yeah. No, it's locked in now, gentlemen. It will not happen again. It's going to be spot on.
This is going to be awesome.
Before we wrap up this podcast, there is one more announcement we want to make, and that is that we are very excited to announce that we will be releasing these uncut interviews from season 1 on a new CPC podcast called Shared Pains Uncut. You've been warned. Search for it in your favorite podcast app or head to constructionprogress.org/podcast to listen in. On behalf of my consummate professional podcasters, we want to thank everyone for listening in to season 1 of the Construction Shared Pains podcast. To those of you who've reached out on LinkedIn, stopped us at conferences, found our inbox, or just given us feedback as to what you like or want to hear in the podcast, thank you so much. We really look forward to joining you here next time.